Hey, I wanted to talk a little bit about life before and after having a near death like experience in 2017. I feel like the version of me that was living life up until then died in that car accident. Maybe not totally suddenly, but it became really apparent that she was no longer alive and well. And I'm going to talk a little bit about that and explain what I mean. Up until my car accident, I was living a life that I thought was me, that I thought was what I wanted, an expression of who I truly was. And I have absolutely no judgment or even really opinion about that life, about those choices and those preferences. To give you a bit of a picture, it was really important for me to leave the house with a full face of makeup. I didn't feel like who I was beneath that was all right. I wouldn't post pictures online without tons of filters. I spent more money than I could actually afford at the hair salon. I would say yes to social invitations that I didn't have the energy for because I wanted to please people and not offend them and keep friends. I wasn't myself completely around my family. I understood and I had heard, for all my life, maybe gossip or negative talk about certain people who lived certain ways or who had certain opinions or faith systems that were different than my family's. And so any of those pieces that I kind of felt were real inside of me, I never would expose my family to or talk about, even if those things weren't bad. Because I didn't want to face rejection or suspicion or ridicule or anything like that. If someone asked me, how are you doing? I would, I'm fine, even if I wasn't fine at all. I had no ability to say, well, today's not the greatest day. Full stop. Not looking for attention, not looking for, just being truthful and honest. There's so much more, but I think you get the picture. After my car accident, I experienced a real shift in my nervous system, in my sixth sense, and my ability to sense in general. Some people are already like this. They don't need a big experience to switch. But it started to show up as being highly sensitive, being an empath, being able to walk into a room and really feel the different moods and the different energies of the people in that room. Sometimes just knowing things, not sure how I knew it, couldn't prove it, keeping it to myself. But then, a day or a week would pass and I'd find out that thing was actually true. So this accident opened up a little bit of that kind of ability. And with that, I could sense inauthenticity in other people. If someone was saying something, but there was some deception or it wasn't 100% true. And that would make me feel really uncomfortable because I wouldn't know what was true. And I never thought or perceived people that way before, and it started to get overwhelming. But more importantly, I could sense things about myself that were inauthentic. It became really uncomfortable, and sometimes I would actually experience nausea if I was saying or doing something that was out of alignment with who I really was or what I really thought. Accuracy on the inside. I noticed pretty quickly just how much of my life consisted of that. And that, I think, triggered some of my dark night of the soul, because I started to realize, very felt even with physical pain, how much conflict there was with how I was showing up in the outside world with how I was experiencing my inner world. And sometimes people talk about spiritual awakenings as these like magical connections with God, which that is, and I think should be a big part of it. But as a result of that, we are awakened to our inauthenticity and our inconsistency and our way of showing up in our society and in our culture and in our family in a way that fits into some sort of a program or a system of being accepted, not being different. So after the accident, it became actually really hard to be around other people at first because I was noticing inconsistencies in them and in society. But I started to realize it was actually more profound and more intense to experience these in myself. And that's when I knew I needed to do a lot, maybe a lifetime's worth of inner work to deprogram myself from what I had been. Again, not that there was something wrong with it, but it was less than true. It was less than real, the way that I was. You know, there's many, many steps that go on and on and on through the years, through eternity, through dimensions of evolution, of understanding, and of truth. And for me, this was just one of them, this near-death-like experience. Even down to things like social media. I couldn't spend a day or a week without going on Facebook. It was really important to me what I looked like, you know, if I looked thin in a picture, if people were liking my pictures and commenting, I would really compare myself to other people, what they were sharing, and if I didn't feel like what I had or who I was as good as them, I would feel this sense of less value. So I had this strange relationship with social media where not only was I addicted to it, I was finding where my importance lay by spending time on there. So in the months and years that followed this car accident, as you can imagine, with all of this discomfort of discovering my way of being up until then, a lot of changes needed to take place. Not because I wanted to be some noble person or do things the right way, but because of massive discomfort in all of these discoveries. I wanted to get into alignment with who I really was, but we can't figure out that, and I mean, that's not a one-time thing, that's an ongoing thing, but we can't figure out any of that unless we drop who we aren't. And when we discover even one little thing that we aren't, any attachment based on insecurity or fear of rejection, that's an indication of something that needs to get dropped somehow. And the hard thing is, the next thing doesn't always show up right away. You know, if you drop a friend that is not good for you, the next greatest friend is not going to fall in your lap the next day. It requires a lot of faith in the process. Faith in being by yourself until the next best thing does come. And in those in-between times, it can be really scary and isolating and painful and easy to fall into addictions, easy to numb out, easy to lower your standards. This is an ongoing thing, you know. For me, anyway, it's an ongoing thing. But the cool thing is that always something better does show up. I have such like a 101% level of trust in that when we let go of something that is not in alignment with our highest good, even if there's a waiting period, something else is going to show up, because we are on an evolutionary path if we're on our spiritual path. sometimes we don't know where to start. And I would say in this moment, without thinking, if you think of the first thing that pops in your head that's a little uncomfortable and not pleasant and not in alignment in your life, but it's there anyways, that would be something to look at. You don't have to go dump it right away, because sometimes when we dump things right away, we're not even ready to let go and something else similar comes in. But at least look at it and be honest with yourself. We are honest with ourselves about how that might not be the greatest fit. And then we can kind of sit with that and get curious about that, or pray about that and ask for some guidance on what needs to shift there in order for us to evolve and move forward. Often too, I noticed that up until my accident, I was making decisions based on logic only, based on what my family thought was valuable and important, based on what my community and society recognized as appropriate and meaningful. And making decisions based on that got me to my mid-30s and living a life that was very mundane. I believe that we all have a divine blueprint, an option that we can open, like a special Christmas gift that's just for us, that is a play out, a rollout of who we really could be in this life. But getting there is going to require us to take some risks. One thing that I learned that I will never forget from a really, really wise woman is that sometimes when we get an idea or hear of an opportunity and it brings us a really high level of excitement, that we should go with that somehow. We shouldn't ignore that. And we only have a few seconds before our logical mind kicks in and starts to tell us all the reasons why we shouldn't do that and we should be more responsible. So that's one way of not getting trapped and waking up later in your life and realizing just how mundane things have been. To when you have that highest excitement, when you hear of that opportunity, to immediately, I always say, make a reservation, make a down payment, tell somebody, make some kind of a commitment that's going to move you one step towards whatever that is. Because, within 5 or 10 seconds, it can be lost and gone in the sea of the ego, of the mundane mind that's only trying to keep us safe. But that's where it gets lost too. The more things that I gave up in that part of me, that structure that I feel died in my car accident, there's very little of it remaining. And again, there's no judgment about it. It's just what was real for me, based on fitting in and not being rejected. The more of those things that naturally fell away, the more exciting things that I never could have dreamed up for myself, goals that I couldn't have set with my logical mind, started to show up. People that were way, way more aligned, that were also moving more towards authenticity with themselves and with the world around them. These kind of people started to show up one by one. Gifts that I didn't even realize were sleeping and lying latent in me started to show up. I couldn't paint, I couldn't draw, I couldn't sing. I had little to no clairsentient abilities. Slowly, these things started to wake up, but they needed that space. They needed that room to be, because my attachments and my way of being in the regular material world were blocking them from showing up. And again, they didn't come overnight. They only would come when I consciously stepped away from things that no longer served me. So that earlier version, that precious trying to survive, trying to say the right thing all the time and not offend anybody, That precious version of me, I believe, died and is still dying piece by piece. Tries to wake up sometimes and survive and reassert herself. But she's lovingly being watched over by my higher self, being smiled at as the struggle continues. And so don't be afraid to let go of things that are blocking what could be. When we're honest with ourselves and we go inside, we know what those things are. We know who those people are. And if you can't let go of them completely, how can you make some space from them? Withdraw a little focus from those things. And just do an experiment and see what else comes in. Who else shows up? What opportunities might fall in your lap? It's really intense and scary, you know. All we know is this trying to do things a certain way, the way that everybody else does things. That's all we know. But I will say that from my experience so far, I would never want to go back and be that person that died. That's complete now. And I would say, whatever risk that brings you high excitement, do something about that. Don't put it off. You don't have to do everything, and you don't have to figure out how it's going to play out. You just have to make one small move to indicate to the universe that you're ready for this. And the right people, places, and opportunities are going to come your way at some point to make it happen. You just have to take one step out. I don't believe that a person needs a near-death-like experience or a peak spiritual experience in order to allow an old version of themselves to die. I wished I had known some of these things before. So whatever needs to die that you've been given to or imprinted by your family or society, that is based in fear and survival and based in not being rejected and not looking weird, please take this as a permission slip. To let go of those things. God, the universe, divinity wants to live through you and open those latent gifts and those latent dreams that you don't even know you have. And there's no shortcut to doing that except with brutal honesty about yourself. Brutal honesty of what is inauthentic. Brutal honesty about what you're doing just based on your fear of being different or being rejected, what people will think. You're so much more than what people think of you on social media. You don't need that. In fact, one of the best decisions I made was to cut out social media 100%. It was really hard. And I had a lot of excuses for myself, like, oh, well, how am I going to stay in touch with this person and that person? And it's like, well, how did I stay in touch with people before? You know, just find that courage within you to do whatever it is that you personally need to do. This is my story, and I can only tell my story. But I'm sure that we all have a version of us that really is coming to completion if you're watching videos like this. So what can you as your higher self do to gently allow that earlier version of you to relax, to lie down, to let go, and to realize it doesn't need to be in the driver's seat anymore. Thanks.